London, 1862. The bitter December wind howled through Mayfair, rattling the windows of townhouses where the aristocracy huddled by their fires, trading gossip like currency. Miss Josephine Vance stood alone in Lord and Lady Pembroke's grand ballroom, her gloved hands clutching her modest fan, watching the glittering crowd swirl around her. Her presence at such an event was peculiar. A governess rarely received invitations to society's grand affairs. But Lady Pembroke had insisted that the young woman who taught her children with such dedication deserved one evening of pleasure. "Remember, you are here as my guest, not as the governess," Lady Pembroke had whispered while adjusting Josephine's borrowed pearl hairpins. "For tonight, simply enjoy yourself." But Josephine knew better than to believe such fantasies. 6 years as a governess had taught her that the invisible barrier between her station and that of her employers could never truly be crossed. She had long ago accepted the truth. Love and happiness were luxuries afforded only to those of proper birth and fortune. For women like her, daughters of disgraced merchants who had died leaving nothing but debt, duty and survival were the only reasonable aspirations. From across the room she caught sight of him, the man whose very presence had set the evening's gossip ablaze. Quentin Xavier, the Duke of Thornfield, had returned to London after a 3-year absence. Tall and imposing, with raven hair and piercing grey eyes, he moved through the crowd with detached indifference. The whispers followed him like shadows. How he had abandoned London after his fiancée had jilted him for an American railroad baron. How he had retreated to his northern estates, becoming as cold and forbidding as the moors themselves. "They say he hasn't smiled since Lady Caroline betrayed him," whispered a young debutante nearby, not bothering to lower her voice. "They call him the Frost Duke now." Josephine observed him with academic interest, noting how people parted before him like waves. His face was handsome but severe, as if carved from marble by an artist who had forgotten to add warmth to the final creation. How peculiar it must be, she thought, to possess everything one could desire, wealth, title, power, yet appear so utterly discontented. A sudden commotion near the refreshment table drew her attention. One of her young charges, 8-year-old Lady Emily Pembroke, had escaped her nursemaid and infiltrated the party. The girl was reaching for a glass of champagne with mischievous determination. Without thinking, Josephine hurried across the room, weaving through the elegant couples. "Lady Emily," she called softly, "I believe your mother would prefer you enjoyed your treats in the nursery." The child pouted. "But Miss Vance, you're attending the ball, why can't I?" "When you're older, my dear, for now." "Is this child disturbing you?" came a deep, aristocratic voice from behind. Josephine turned to find herself standing barely 2 feet from the Duke of Thornfield. Up close, his features were even more striking: high cheekbones, a strong jaw tensed with displeasure, and those eyes that seemed to evaluate and dismiss her in a single glance. "Not at all, Your Grace," she replied, dipping into a curtsy. "Lady Emily is one of my pupils. She merely grew curious about the festivities." "Your pupil," his gaze sharpened. "You are the governess, then?" It wasn't a question, but a statement that seemed to place her firmly back in her proper sphere. Josephine felt her cheeks warm, acutely aware of her borrowed gown and the simplicity of her appearance compared to the diamond-draped ladies around them. "I am," she acknowledged, lifting her chin slightly, "Miss Josephine Vance, Your Grace." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps, that she did not simper or affect airs beyond her station. Before he could respond, Lady Emily tugged at Josephine's hand. "Miss Vance tells the most wonderful stories, Your Grace," the child announced, "about brave knights who rescue princesses from dragons." A corner of the Duke's mouth twitched. "Does she indeed? How fascinating that in these modern times, governesses still perpetuate such fanciful notions." Josephine felt a flicker of irritation. "I find, Your Grace, that children benefit from stories of courage and honor, regardless of the era. Though I admit, in my versions, the princesses often rescue themselves." Lady Emily nodded vigorously. In Miss Vance's stories, the princesses carry swords and solve riddles. For a moment, Josephine thought she detected a genuine spark of interest in the Duke's cold eyes, but it vanished so quickly she decided she must have imagined it. How progressive, he remarked dryly. Well, Miss Vance, I suggest you return your adventurous pupil to the nursery before Lady Pembroke notices her absence. Good evening. With a curt nod, he turned and strode away, leaving Josephine with the distinct impression that she had been dismissed from his consciousness entirely. Come along, Lady Emily, she said, taking the child's hand. Your Grace is right, we must get you back upstairs. As they made their way to the door, Josephine heard Lady Pembroke call her name. Her employer approached with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Josephine, dear, I see you found our little escapee, she said, nodding toward Emily, but I also noticed you speaking with the Duke of Thornfield. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I must caution you, he is not a man to be trifled with. His disposition since the scandal with Lady Caroline has been positively arctic. I assure you, my lady, our exchange was brief and entirely proper, Josephine replied. Lady Pembroke patted her arm. Of course, dear. I only mention it because there's talk of him seeking a bride this season, and every unmarried lady in London will be pursuing him with alarming determination. Best to stay clear of such competitive waters. Josephine nearly laughed aloud at the absurdity. I assure you, Lady Pembroke, I harbour no illusions about my station. The Duke need not fear any designs from the governess. After escorting Emily to the nursery, Josephine returned to her small room in the servants' wing. She removed the borrowed finery with care, placing each item in the box Lady Pembroke had generously provided. As she changed into her plain nightgown, she caught her reflection in the small mirror above her washstand. At 24, she was neither a great beauty nor a plain woman, simply ordinary. Brown hair that refused to hold a curl, eyes too large for her face, a mouth too wide to be fashionable. Perfectly suited to a governess, she murmured to herself, turning away. That night she dreamed not of dukes or ballrooms, but of her father's face on the day their world collapsed, the day the authorities had come to seize their home and possessions, revealing his secret gambling debts and fraudulent business dealings. She had been 16 then, watching her future evaporate like morning mist. The memory reinforced the lesson she had learned that day. Trust and hope were luxuries she could not afford. 3 days after the ball, Josephine sat in the Pembroke library with her charges, supervising their Latin exercises, when the butler appeared at the door. Miss Vance, he intoned with unusual solemnity, your presence is requested in the drawing-room immediately. Lady Emily looked up eagerly. Is it a visitor for Miss Vance? She never receives visitors. Mind your studies, Josephine instructed, rising with a sense of foreboding. Unexpected summonses rarely brought good news for those in service. In the drawing-room, she found Lady Pembroke looking uncharacteristically anxious, pacing before the fireplace. Beside her stood Lord Pembroke, his expression grave. Ah, Josephine, Lady Pembroke said, her voice strained. Please sit down, my dear. Has there been a complaint about my teaching? Josephine asked directly, preferring to face any criticism with dignity. Lord Pembroke cleared his throat. Not at all, Miss Vance. Your service has been exemplary. However, a rather unusual situation has arisen. He exchanged glances with his wife. The Duke of Thornfield has sent a formal request to speak with you, alone. Josephine blinked in confusion. With me, there must be some mistake. There is no mistake, Lady Pembroke said. His messenger was most specific. The Duke requests your presence at Thornfield House tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock precisely. But why would he wish to speak with me? Josephine's mind raced through their brief encounter, finding nothing that would warrant such a summons. He did not specify, though I suspect it may concern a position, Lord Pembroke suggested, perhaps as governess for a relation's children. The Duke has several sisters with young families. Lady Pembroke twisted her handkerchief nervously. Whatever the reason, we cannot refuse him. The Duke's influence is considerable. She leaned forward. Josephine, you must be exceedingly careful. The Duke is known for his exacting standards and unforgiving nature. Say little, agree to whatever reasonable requests he makes, and do nothing to offend him. The warning only heightened Josephine's unease. Of course, my lady. You may take the afternoon. Thompson will drive you in the small carriage. Lord Pembroke nodded, as if the matter were settled. And Josephine, he hesitated. The Duke's good opinion could be beneficial to this household. Please remember that. The implication was clear. Her employers expected her to represent their interests favorably, regardless of what the Duke might want. It was yet another reminder that her life was not fully her own. The following afternoon, as the Pembrokes' modest carriage pulled up before Thornfield House, Josephine fought to calm her racing heart. The Duke's London residence was imposingly grand, a palatial structure of Portland stone with columns flanking the entrance. Footmen in immaculate livery stood at attention beside the massive doors. She was escorted through a succession of opulent rooms, each more magnificent than the last, until she reached a study lined with leather-bound books from floor to ceiling. The Duke stood by a window, his back to the door, staring out at his manicured gardens. "Miss Vance, Your Grace," announced the butler before withdrawing silently. The Duke turned, his expression inscrutable. He was dressed impeccably in a tailored black coat that emphasized his broad shoulders, a silk waistcoat, and perfectly pressed trousers. Every inch the aristocrat. "Miss Vance," he nodded curtly. "Thank you for coming." "Your Grace requested my presence," she replied simply, remaining near the door. "I could hardly refuse." A flicker of something, amusement perhaps, crossed his face. "Indeed. Few do refuse me, though I sense you might have preferred to." His directness surprised her. "I confess to being curious about the purpose of this meeting, Your Grace." "Please sit." He gestured to a chair before his desk, then took his own seat opposite her. For a long moment, he studied her with unnerving intensity. "What I am about to propose will sound extraordinary, Miss Vance. I ask that you hear me out completely before responding." Josephine nodded, her apprehension growing. The Duke steepled his fingers. "I find myself in need of a wife." Her eyes widened in shock. "Not in the conventional sense," he continued quickly, noting her expression. "What I require is a marriage of convenience, an arrangement that would be financially advantageous to you while solving a particular problem for me." I don't understand," Josephine stammered, certain she had misheard him. "My grandfather's will contains an unfortunate provision," the Duke explained, his tone matter of fact. "If I have not married by my 30th birthday, which occurs in 3 months' time, the bulk of my unentailed properties will pass to my cousin, George Xavier. The man is a dissolute gambler who would destroy generations of careful stewardship within a year." Josephine sat perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. "And you are proposing this arrangement to me?" "A governess you've spoken to once, for less than 5 minutes." "Precisely because of that." He rose, pacing the room with controlled energy. "I have no desire for a society marriage. Those women have expectations, emotional entanglements, demands for attention, romantic notions." He spoke the word romantic as if it were a disease. "What I need is someone practical, someone who understands that this is strictly a business arrangement." "And you believe I am such a person?" Josephine asked, finding her voice at last. "I made inquiries after our meeting. You are well educated, composed, and have managed your reduced circumstances with dignity. You understand hierarchy and propriety. Most importantly, you have no family connections to complicate matters." The clinical assessment of her suitability both offended and fascinated her. "You investigated me." "Thoroughly," he admitted without apology. "Your father's disgrace, your mother's death, your years at that charitable institution before securing your position with the Pembrokes. You've survived admirably, Miss Vance." Josephine felt exposed, as if he had read pages from her private journal. "And what exactly would this arrangement entail, Your Grace?" "A legal marriage, performed quietly but legitimately. You would assume the title of Duchess of Thornfield and receive an annual allowance of £5,000, yours to keep regardless of what happens in the future. You would reside primarily at Thornfield Manor in Yorkshire, overseeing the household but otherwise living as you please. After a suitable period, say 2 years, we could arrange an amicable separation if you wish, with your financial security guaranteed for life. £5,000 annually. The sum was staggering, more than she would earn in 20 years of service. It could secure not just comfort but true independence. "And what would you expect of me as your Duchess?" she asked carefully. The Duke's expression remained impassive. Public appearances when necessary, competent management of my households, discretion always, and he hesitated for the first time. While I have no interest in romantic attachment, the marriage would need to appear genuine for legal purposes. The implication hung in the air between them. Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks. I see, she said quietly, and children. Not required for the terms of the will, he replied with businesslike efficiency. Though if there were issue, they would of course be my legitimate heirs and provided for accordingly. Josephine stood, needing to move to think. The proposition was preposterous, yet strangely tempting. To never again worry about losing her position, to have security that could not be taken away by an employer's whim. Why not choose someone from your own circle? She asked. Surely there are widows or quiet gentlewomen of appropriate background who would welcome such an arrangement. They would want more than an arrangement, Miss Vance. They would want what I cannot give. For a moment, something vulnerable flashed across his features. I learned 3 years ago that I am incapable of the sentiment called love. I will not mislead another woman as I did Lady Caroline. So there it was, the famous scandal that had driven him from London. Josephine wondered what had happened to freeze his heart so completely, but she knew better than to ask. This is most unexpected, Your Grace. I would need time to consider. Of course, however, time is not abundant. He walked to his desk and removed a sealed document. This contains the formal terms of my proposal, including provisions for your financial security, regardless of how our arrangement might evolve. I will require your answer within 3 days. Josephine accepted the document with a steady hand that belied her inner turmoil. And if I refuse? Then we shall never speak of this again, and I will approach another candidate. His tone suggested this was merely a business transaction that could easily be redirected. As she prepared to leave, a final question occurred to her. Your Grace, why did you notice me that night? I was hardly the only woman in the room. For the briefest moment, his austere expression softened. You were honest, Miss Vance. When you spoke of your stories where princesses rescue themselves, there was no artifice, no attempt to impress or manipulate. In my experience, that quality is exceedingly rare. 3 days later, in the small private chapel at Thornfield House, Josephine Vance became the Duchess of Thornfield, in a ceremony attended only by the Duke's solicitor and the Pembrokes, who had been stunned by the development but quickly recognized the advantage of having their former governess elevated to such a position. The bride wore a simple ivory gown, the first new dress she had owned in years, and spoke her vows in a clear, steady voice that revealed nothing of her inner uncertainty. The Duke had been correct in his assessment. She was practical above all else. This marriage offered security and independence that would otherwise be forever beyond her reach. She had no romantic illusions to shatter, no expectations beyond those clearly outlined in their agreement. If the arrangement lacked warmth or affection, well, she had lived without those comforts for most of her life. You may kiss your bride, Your Grace, the vicar prompted when the vows were complete. Quentin hesitated, then leaned forward to press his lips briefly against hers, a dry, formal gesture that fulfilled the requirement without crossing into genuine intimacy. Yet Josephine felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest at the contact, surprising her with its intensity. Well done, Duchess, he murmured as he drew away, his expression unchanged. The first hurdle is complete. The journey to Thornfield Manor in Yorkshire took 2 days, during which the newly wed couple travelled in near silence. The Duke spent most of his time reading reports from his estates, occasionally making notations in the margins. Josephine occupied herself with a volume of poetry she had found in his travelling library, stealing glances at her husband when she thought he wasn't looking. In the flickering lamplight of the carriage, his profile appeared less severe, almost handsome in repose. Once, catching her watching him, he raised an eyebrow questioningly. I was just thinking that I know very little about you, despite our new connection, she admitted. There is little to know beyond what you see, he replied. I manage my estates, fulfill my obligations to my tenants, and occasionally attend Parliament when duty requires it. My life is orderly and predictable, precisely as I prefer it. And before. What were you like before Lady Caroline? The question slipped out before she could reconsider its wisdom. His jaw tightened visibly. That is not a topic for discussion, Duchess, now or ever. I apologize, she said quietly. I did not mean to pry. After a moment, his expression softened fractionally. No need for apology. We are still learning the boundaries of our arrangement. He hesitated, then added, perhaps you might tell me something of yourself instead. What does Josephine Vance read when not instructing children in Latin declensions? The olive branch, however small, encouraged her. History, primarily, and natural philosophy when I can access such texts. The Pembrokes had a limited library. And those stories you create for your pupils, the ones with sword-wielding princesses. There was a hint of genuine curiosity in his voice. Josephine smiled faintly. Those come from my own imagination, I'm afraid. I found that young girls respond better to tales where the heroines take active roles in their own rescue. A rather progressive viewpoint. Perhaps. Or simply practical. Girls must learn to rely on their own resources in this world, especially those without fortune or family to protect them. Something in her words seemed to strike him, for he studied her with renewed interest. You speak from experience. As do we all, Your Grace, she replied, turning back to her book. Thornfield Manor emerged from the morning mist like a vision from another century, a sprawling Tudor mansion of warm red brick and mullioned windows, surrounded by formal gardens that gave way to wild, windswept moors beyond. Despite the December chill, Josephine felt a surprising spark of belonging as they approached. This ancient place had weathered centuries of history, enduring through wars and political upheavals. Perhaps there was something fitting about its new mistress being equally weathered by life's trials. The household staff lined up to greet them, their curious eyes taking in the unexpected Duchess with barely concealed interest. The Duke introduced her with formal correctness, then immediately retreated to his study, leaving Josephine to navigate her new role alone. Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, a formidable woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, regarded Josephine with undisguised skepticism. We were not informed of His Grace's marriage until yesterday, Your Grace. The Duchess's chambers have been prepared, but I'm afraid there's been little time for the usual arrangements. I understand completely, Mrs. Winters, Josephine replied, keeping her voice steady despite her nervousness. I'm sure everything will be satisfactory. I have simple tastes. Indeed, Your Grace. The housekeeper's tone made it clear she found this trait unusual in a duchess. Perhaps you would like to rest after your journey. Or shall I show you the house first? The house, please, Josephine decided. I should like to begin understanding my new home immediately. The tour revealed Thornfield to be even more impressive inside than out. 64 rooms in total, including a magnificent library that made Josephine's breath catch with delight. A picture gallery containing portraits of Xavier ancestors dating back to Tudor times, and a conservatory filled with exotic plants from around the world. His Grace's mother was particularly fond of botany, Mrs. Winters explained as they walked among the palms and orchids. She established this collection before her death 20 years ago. The Duke maintains it in her memory, though he rarely visits himself. As they continued through the house, Josephine gradually became aware of the staff's whispered comments trailing behind them. She caught fragments, governess, sudden marriage, scandal in London, and realized her arrival had provided fresh fodder for the servants' hall gossip. It was to be expected, of course. A duke suddenly marrying a penniless governess would naturally provoke speculation. Mrs. Winters, she said as they concluded the tour in the grand entrance hall, I understand my presence here is unexpected and perhaps confusing to the staff. I would appreciate your assistance in helping them adjust to the change. The housekeeper's expression softened marginally. Of course, Your Grace, though if I may speak plainly. Please do. The staff's primary concern is for His Grace's happiness. He has not been himself since the unfortunate events in London 3 years ago. If you have brought him back to us, that is all that matters. Josephine felt a pang of guilt at the deception. I hope to make Thornfield a comfortable home for everyone, including His Grace. That evening, she dined alone in the cavernous formal dining room, the Duke having sent word that he was occupied with estate matters and would take his meal in his study. As she sat at one end of the massive table designed to seat 30, surrounded by ancestral portraits and served by footmen who watched her every movement, Josephine felt the full weight of her strange new position. She was a duchess in name and legal standing, yet completely alone in a house filled with people. She had gained security and status beyond her wildest expectations, yet had no one with whom to share her thoughts or impressions. The irony was not lost on her. After dinner, restless and unable to settle, she found herself drawn to the library. The room was blessedly warm, with a fire crackling in the massive stone fireplace and wall sconces casting a golden glow over the thousands of leather-bound volumes. Josephine ran her fingers reverently over the spines, marveling at titles she had only read about but never seen, scientific treatises, historical accounts, poetry collections, novels in multiple languages. She selected a volume of astronomical observations and settled into a comfortable chair near the fire, soon losing herself in descriptions of distant celestial bodies. She did not hear the door open, nor notice the Duke's presence until his shadow fell across her page. "You've discovered my sanctuary," he observed, startling her. Josephine rose quickly. "I apologize if I'm intruding, Your Grace. I can return to my chambers." "No need." He waved her back to her seat. "The library is yours to use as you wish. I merely came to fetch a particular volume." He crossed to a far shelf and selected a large book bound in red Morocco leather. As he turned to leave, Josephine found herself reluctant to return to her solitude. "Do you often work so late into the evening, Your Grace?" He paused, seemingly surprised by the attempt at conversation. "Yes. I find night hours most productive for thought." "I've always felt the same," she admitted. "At the Pembrokes, my only uninterrupted time for reading was after the household retired." The Duke regarded her with what might have been interest. "What are you reading now?" She showed him the cover. Herschel's Astronomical Observations. "I've never had access to such works before." "You have scientific interests." There was no condescension in his tone, only curiosity, among others. "My father encouraged my education before his difficulties." She hesitated, then continued. "He believed women's minds were as capable as men's, merely undertrained." A progressive viewpoint for a merchant. He was an unusual man in many ways. She smiled faintly at the memory, though ultimately not a wise one when it came to financial matters. The Duke moved closer, examining the book in her hands. "Herschel's work is fascinating, though somewhat outdated now. If you're interested in astronomy, there's a more recent publication by Lord Rosse regarding the spiral nature of certain nebulae. It should be on the third shelf, near the window." Josephine looked at him in surprise. "You're familiar with astronomical literature?" "I have varied interests, Duchess," he replied, a hint of defensiveness in his voice. "Contrary to what society might believe, I do not spend all my time brooding in darkened rooms." The unexpected glimpse of humor caught her off guard, and before she could stop herself, Josephine laughed, a genuine, warm sound that seemed to startle them both. For a brief moment, the Duke's austere expression transformed, his eyes widening as if he'd witnessed something extraordinary. "You have a remarkable laugh," he said quietly. Embarrassed, Josephine composed herself. "Forgive me." "I didn't mean to." "No," he interrupted, his voice different somehow. "There's nothing to forgive. It's merely that I haven't heard genuine laughter in this house for a very long time." He hesitated, then added, "It suits you, Duchess. You should do it more often." With that, he bowed slightly and departed, leaving Josephine staring after him in confusion. Had there been a compliment buried in that exchange, or merely an observation? The man was impossible to read, his emotions, if he had any, locked behind an impenetrable facade of aristocratic reserve. Yet as she returned to her book, she couldn't help but recall the way his eyes had changed when she laughed, as if something frozen had momentarily thawed. Over the next fortnight, Josephine gradually established a routine at Thornfield. Her mornings were spent with Mrs. Winters, learning the intricacies of managing a great house, ordering supplies, supervising staff, planning menus, and reviewing household accounts. The afternoons she devoted to exploring the estate, both the formal gardens and the wilder terrain beyond, often returning windblown but invigorated from long walks across the moors. The Duke remained largely absent, departing early each morning to inspect various properties and returning late in the evening. They dined together only twice, exchanging perfunctory conversation about estate matters before retiring to their separate chambers. If their brief moment of connection in the library had meant anything to him, he showed no sign of it. One evening, as a winter storm battered the windows with sleet and wind, Josephine again sought refuge in the library. She had just selected a novel when the Duke entered, looking weary from his day's exertions. "Good evening, Your Grace," she greeted him, preparing to leave as had become their custom when accidentally encountering each other. "Stay," he said unexpectedly, "unless you prefer solitude." Josephine hesitated. "I would not wish to disturb your work." "I've had enough of work for today." He moved to the sideboard and poured 2 glasses of brandy, offering one to her. When she hesitated, he added, "For the chill. The storm has brought winter's full fury tonight." She accepted the glass with a nod of thanks, surprised by this small gesture of consideration. The Duke settled into a chair opposite hers, stretching his long legs toward the fire. For a time, they sat in surprisingly comfortable silence, listening to the wind howl around the ancient chimneys and the occasional pop of the fire. Josephine sipped her brandy slowly, savoring the unfamiliar warmth that spread through her chest. "The staff tell me you've been exploring the moors," he remarked finally. "Yes, I find them strangely beautiful, especially when the heather catches the light. Most ladies find them desolate and forbidding." "Perhaps I am not most ladies, Your Grace," she replied with a small smile. His eyes studied her over the rim of his glass. "No, I suppose you are not." After a pause he added, "You need not address me as Your Grace when we are alone. Quentin will suffice." The offer of his given name seemed significant somehow, a tiny crack in his formal armor. "Then you must call me Josephine, rather than Duchess, a title I still cannot quite believe applies to me. Does it feel strange, your new position?" "Exceedingly," she admitted. "Yesterday, Mrs. Winters asked for my approval on the spring planting for the kitchen gardens, and I nearly looked over my shoulder to see whom she was addressing." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Yet you seem to be managing admirably. The staff speak highly of your competence." "Do they?" Josephine felt an unexpected flush of pleasure at the praise. "I'm trying to learn quickly, though there's so much I don't yet understand." "Such as?" She considered her answer carefully. "Such as why the East Wing remains closed and unmentioned, despite my questions. Or why certain topics, your family, your time in London, even the management of the Blackthorn estate, are met with immediate silence from the staff." His expression darkened. "The staff knows better than to gossip about matters that do not concern them. As your wife, even a wife in name only, I thought perhaps some knowledge of your past might help me avoid uncomfortable situations." She met his gaze steadily. "I have no wish to cause you distress through ignorance." Quentin studied her for a long moment, then set down his glass with deliberate care. "Very well, what would you like to know?" Surprised by his willingness, Josephine chose her question thoughtfully. "The East Wing, why is it closed?" "It contains my mother's apartments, left untouched since her death." His voice was neutral, revealing nothing of the emotion such a preservation suggested. "She died in childbirth, along with what would have been my sister." "I'm sorry," Josephine said softly. "You were young." 10 years old. My father closed the wing afterward and forbade anyone to enter. When he died 5 years later, I maintained the tradition." "And Blackthorn Estate?" The steward nearly dropped his ledger when I inquired about it. A muscle tightened in Quentin's jaw. "Blackthorn was to be settlement property for my marriage to Lady Caroline. After our engagement ended, I ordered the estate closed. It remains unoccupied." The personal cost of that decision must have been enormous, Josephine realized. Blackthorn likely represented all his hopes for that marriage, abandoned when those hopes were shattered. "Thank you for telling me," she said simply. "I'll not mention it again." He looked at her with an unreadable expression. "You are unlike anyone I have known, Josephine Vance. Most women would have pressed for details of the scandal, for the gossip that consumed London 3 years ago. I have little interest in society gossip. I've been its subject too often myself." "Yes, your father's disgrace," he nodded. "That experience shaped you, I think." "As yours shaped you," she replied quietly. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered in his eyes, a glimpse of the man beneath the ducal mask. Then he stood abruptly, the connection broken. "It's late, I should not keep you from your rest." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Tomorrow I must visit the northern farms to assess storm damage. Would you care to accompany me? The terrain might interest you, and it would give the tenants an opportunity to meet their new duchess." Josephine couldn't hide her surprise at the invitation. "I would like that very much." "Good. We'll depart after breakfast." He hesitated, then added, "Dress warmly. The North Valley catches the wind." With that small consideration, he was gone, leaving Josephine to wonder at the complex man she had married. Behind his coldness lay a careful attention to detail, a sense of responsibility toward his dependents, and a deep, unresolved pain he allowed no one to touch. The following day brought unexpected revelations as they traveled across the estate. Watching Quentin interact with his tenants, Josephine saw a side of him society likely never witnessed. He knew each farmer by name, inquired after their families with genuine interest, and displayed a detailed knowledge of their operations. The tenants, in turn, showed none of the cowering deference one might expect toward a powerful landlord, instead speaking frankly about their concerns and needs. When an elderly farmer's wife insisted they stop for tea in her modest cottage, Quentin acquiesced without hesitation, ducking his tall frame through the low doorway and accepting a chipped cup with the same grace he might show at a royal reception. "His Grace helped our Thomas when the fever took him 2 winters past," the woman explained to Josephine as they sat by her small hearth. "Brought the doctor from York himself, he did, and covered all the expenses." Josephine glanced at Quentin, who appeared uncomfortable with the praise. "The boy showed promise," he said dismissively. "It would have been wasteful to lose such potential." But Josephine saw through the pretense of cool pragmatism. Throughout the day, she collected similar stories: scholarships arranged for bright children of tenants, repairs made to cottages at the Duke's personal expense, widows provided with pensions beyond what custom required. The Frost Duke of London gossip seemed entirely absent on his own lands, replaced by a man of quiet, understated compassion who nevertheless shunned acknowledgement of his good deeds. As they rode home in the gathering dusk, Josephine found herself viewing her husband with new eyes. "You care deeply for them," she observed. "Your tenants." Quentin kept his gaze on the road ahead. "They depend on me. It is my duty to ensure their welfare." "It goes beyond duty, I think," she persisted gently. "You know their children's names, their concerns, their hopes." He shrugged uncomfortably. A good landlord should understand his tenants' circumstances. "It's simply practical management." "Is that what you told yourself when you paid for Thomas Miller's doctor? Practical management?" For a moment, she thought she had pressed too far, but then a reluctant smile tugged at his lips. "You're remarkably perceptive, Duchess." "I was a governess. Observation becomes second nature when managing children not your own." Their carriage crested a hill, revealing Thornfield Manor below, its windows glowing warmly against the twilight. Quentin gestured toward the site. "What do you think of it, your new home?" Josephine considered carefully before answering. "I think it reflects its master, imposing at first glance, full of history and untold stories, occasionally forbidding, yet ultimately welcoming to those who take the time to know it properly." He turned to her, genuine surprise evident in his expression. "That is perhaps the most generous assessment anyone has offered of either myself or Thornfield." "Not generous," she corrected. "Merely honest." Later that night, as Josephine prepared for bed, a knock sounded at her door. Her lady's maid had already been dismissed, so she quickly donned her dressing gown before answering. Quentin stood in the corridor, still fully dressed, holding a small leather-bound book. He seemed momentarily disconcerted by her state of undress. his eyes taking in her loose hair and the thin silk of her dressing gown before quickly returning to her face. "Forgive the intrusion," he said stiffly. "I found this in the library and thought it might interest you." He extended the book toward her. Drawings of the night sky as viewed through Lord Ross's telescope at Parsonstown. Some of the nebulae we discussed. Josephine accepted the book, touched by the thoughtful gesture. "Thank you, I shall enjoy studying it." "There's an observation platform on the East Tower," he added. "It was built by my grandfather, who shared an interest in astronomy. You might find it useful on clear nights." He stepped back, preparing to leave, then hesitated. "I wanted to say also that you conducted yourself admirably today with the tenants. They were impressed by your genuine interest in their concerns." The compliment warmed her unexpectedly. "They're good people. I'm glad to know them." "Yes, well," he cleared his throat. "Good night then, Josephine." "Good night, Quentin." As he walked away, Josephine clutched the book to her chest, puzzling over the enigma of her husband. Each day seemed to reveal a new facet of his character, glimpses of warmth and consideration beneath the frigid exterior he presented to the world. What had happened to make such a man believe himself incapable of love? The answer came 3 weeks later, arriving with the morning post in the form of an elegantly pennied invitation. Josephine was reviewing household accounts with Mrs. Winters when Quentin entered the morning room, his expression thunderous. "Leave us," he ordered the housekeeper, who curtsied and departed immediately. "What's happened?" Josephine asked, alarmed by his evident anger. He thrust a cream-coloured card toward her. "This." An invitation to Lord and Lady Harrington's annual spring ball in London, addressed to the Duke and Duchess of Thornfield. Josephine scanned the invitation, confusion evident in her expression. "I don't understand your concern. Surely such invitations are common for someone of your standing." "The Harringtons are Caroline's parents," he said flatly. "This invitation is not social courtesy, it's calculated humiliation. They wish to parade their daughter's triumph and my supposed defeat before all of society." "Defeat?" Josephine set down the invitation. "I don't understand." Quentin paced the room, tension evident in every line of his body. 3 years ago, I was engaged to Lady Caroline Harrington. The match was considered ideal, her family's ancient lineage complementing my wealth and title. I believed myself in love. His voice hardened. 2 weeks before our wedding, I discovered her in a compromising position with James Blackwood, an American businessman with newly acquired wealth and no breeding whatsoever. Josephine winced at the betrayal. "I'm sorry." The humiliation was complete when she declared, in front of half of London society, that she had never loved me, that I was incapable of inspiring genuine affection, being too cold, too controlled, too concerned with duty rather than passion. His laugh was bitter. She claimed Blackwood made her feel alive in ways I never could. They married a month later and departed for America, leaving me as the central figure in the season's most delicious scandal. Now Josephine understood the whispers that had followed him at the Pembrokes ball, the speculation, the pitying glances, the nickname Frost Duke. "And now the Harringtons have invited us to their ball," she mused. "Why?" "Caroline and Blackwood have returned to London for the season. No doubt her parents wish to showcase their daughter's triumphant American marriage while observing my response to seeing her again." His jaw tightened. "I will not give them that satisfaction. So we shall decline." "No," Quentin's eyes glittered with determination. "We shall attend, together, and demonstrate that their daughter's rejection affected me not at all." Josephine stared at him in disbelief. "You wish to use our marriage as a shield against gossip. Is that not partly why you agreed to this arrangement, the security and status it provides?" His tone was challenging. "Yes, but..." "Then this is merely an extension of our original agreement. We present ourselves as a contented couple, society's speculation dies, and the Harringtons' attempt at humiliation fails." He spoke with cold precision. "I'll arrange for suitable attire for you. We'll depart for London in 3 weeks' time." As he strode from the room, Josephine felt a curious hollowness in her chest. Of course their marriage was one of convenience. She had never forgotten that fact. Yet somehow, over the past weeks, as they had shared quiet evenings in the library, ridden together across the estate, and engaged in increasingly open conversations, she had begun to feel something more substantial developing between them. Now she understood, she was still merely a useful accessory, a shield against scandal rather than a true partner. The reminder strung more than it should have. The journey to London was undertaken in tense silence. Quentin buried himself in correspondence, while Josephine pretended absorption in a novel whose words blurred before her eyes. They had scarcely spoken since the invitation arrived, reverting to formal politeness that felt more painful after their brief period of growing companionship. Thornfield House in London proved as impressive as its rural counterpart, though lacking the character Josephine had come to appreciate in the Yorkshire manor. Here, everything was designed to display wealth and status: gilded furnishings, priceless artwork, liveried servants moving with practiced precision. It felt like a stage set rather than a home. "These will be your apartments," Quentin informed her, leading her through a suite of elegantly appointed rooms overlooking a private garden. "I've arranged for a lady's maid with experience serving duchesses. She'll help prepare you for the Harringtons' ball." Josephine nodded, noting the careful distance he maintained between them. "And what role would you like me to play at this event, besides existing as evidence of your indifference to Lady Caroline?" He frowned at her directness. "Simply be yourself. Your natural dignity will make the necessary impression." "My natural dignity as a former governess, now unexpectedly elevated to duchess?" she asked with a hint of bitterness. "I'm sure that will impress the Harringtons immensely." Quentin's expression softened unexpectedly. "Your worth has nothing to do with your former position, Josephine. Surely you know that." The sudden gentleness in his voice caught her off guard. "Do I? You've made it quite clear that our marriage serves a practical purpose, first securing your inheritance, now shielding your pride. My actual self seems rather incidental to these arrangements." His brow furrowed as if the thought had never occurred to him. "That's not," he stopped, reconsidering. "I have not expressed myself well. Yes, our marriage began as an arrangement, but I have come to value your companionship and insights." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "more than I anticipated." The admission, minimal though it was, eased some of the tension between them. "Thank you for saying so. I have enjoyed our conversations as well." A faint smile touched his lips. "Even when I'm being insufferably autocratic." "Especially then," she replied with unexpected honesty. "Your certainty is actually rather comforting to someone who has lived with constant insecurity." Something shifted in his eyes, a softening, a moment of genuine connection. Then he cleared his throat and stepped back, the ducal mask sliding back into place. "Rest now. We have 3 days before the ball, during which several modistes will visit to ensure you have appropriate attire." He moved toward the door. "And Josephine, thank you for accompanying me in this. I know it's beyond our original agreement." After he left, Josephine moved to the window, gazing out at the manicured London garden, so different from Thornfield's wild beauty. In 3 days, she would face the ton as a duchess, she who had once stood in ballroom corners as an invisible governess. The irony might have amused her if she weren't so aware of the real purpose behind their appearance. She was to be a shield, a demonstration, a convenient fiction. Yet Quentin's words echoed in her mind, "I have come to value your companionship." Perhaps there was something genuine growing between them after all, not the grand passion of novels, but a quiet appreciation, a developing respect. It would have to be enough. The night of the Harringtons' ball arrived with a flurry of activity. Josephine's new lady's maid, Simpson, proved worth her considerable salary, transforming the former governess into a vision that even Josephine herself barely recognized in the mirror. Her gown was a triumph of sapphire silk that emphasized the creamy pallor of her skin and the rich brown of her hair, which had been arranged in an elegant style adorned with diamond pins. Family jewels Quentin had unexpectedly sent to her room that afternoon. The Duchess's tiara, last worn by his mother, glittered atop her head, its weight unfamiliar but somehow grounding. "You look magnificent, Your Grace," Simpson declared with professional satisfaction. "His Grace will be most pleased." When Josephine descended the grand staircase, Quentin was waiting in the entrance hall below. He looked up as she appeared, and for once, his impassive expression faltered. Something akin to wonder crossed his features as he watched her approach. "Josephine," he said softly, taking her gloved hand, "you are remarkable." She felt a blush warm her cheeks. "The gown is beautiful." "Thank you for your generosity." "It is not the gown," he replied, his eyes holding hers with unexpected intensity, "though it compliments you perfectly." The simple compliment affected her more than elaborate flattery from another man might have done. "You look rather handsome yourself, Your Grace," she responded, noting how his formal evening attire emphasized his broad shoulders and commanding presence. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Then we shall make a presentable couple, at least." He offered his arm. "Are you ready to face the lion's den?" Josephine took a steadying breath. "As ready as one can be to face a roomful of aristocrats eager to dissect my every word and gesture." "Remember," he said, leading her toward the waiting carriage, "you outrank virtually everyone who will be present tonight. You are the Duchess of Thornfield. You need not explain or apologize for your presence." The reminder of her position strengthened her resolve. Whatever society might whisper about her origins, they could not deny the title she now held. She would comport herself with the dignity Quentin deserved in a wife, regardless of their arrangement's true nature. Lord and Lady Harrington's townhouse blazed with light, carriages lined the street for several blocks, and liveried footmen directed the constant stream of arriving guests. As their carriage joined the queue, Josephine felt Quentin tense beside her. "We need not stay long," she offered, touching his arm lightly, "just long enough to make the necessary impression." He covered her hand with his own, a rare gesture of physical contact. "Thank you for understanding. This is more difficult than I anticipated." When they finally entered the ballroom, the effect was immediate and electric. Conversations faltered, heads turned, and whispers spread like ripples in a pond. The Duke of Thornfield had returned to society, with a wife no one had known existed until the announcement in the Gazette 3 months earlier. Lady Harrington, a handsome woman with Caroline's golden colouring, approached them with a smile that didn't reach her calculating eyes. "Your Grace," she greeted Quentin with a curtsy, "how delightful that you could join us after such a long absence from town." Her gaze shifted to Josephine, assessment evident in every glance. "And this must be your Duchess. What a surprising development." "Lady Harrington," Quentin replied with perfect courtesy that nevertheless conveyed chill. "May I present my wife, Josephine, Duchess of Thornfield." Josephine, Lady Harrington, is an old family acquaintance. Josephine inclined her head with precisely the degree of acknowledgement appropriate from a duchess to a mere baroness. "Lady Harrington. A lovely gathering you've arranged." The older woman's smile tightened at Josephine's composed demeanor. "Indeed, I'm sure everyone is eager to make your acquaintance, Duchess. Your marriage was quite the sensation, so private, so unexpected." "The best decisions often are," Josephine replied smoothly. "His Grace and I preferred to avoid the typical social circus surrounding aristocratic marriages." Lady Harrington's eyes narrowed slightly. How practical. Though one wonders why such secrecy was necessary. Before Josephine could respond, Quentin placed a protective hand at the small of her back. "If you'll excuse us, Lady Harrington, I believe the Earl of Westmoreland is trying to catch my attention." "Political matters, you understand." As they moved away, Josephine felt rather than saw Lady Harrington's disapproving gaze follow them. "Round 1 completed," she murmured to Quentin. "Though I suspect the evening holds many more such encounters." She was not mistaken. Over the next hour, they navigated a sea of curious aristocrats, all eager to assess the mysterious new duchess. Josephine met each inquiry with calm dignity, neither apologizing for her background nor elaborating on details of their courtship. Quentin remained close at her side, his hand occasionally touching hers or resting lightly on her back, small gestures that might have seemed merely polite to observers, but which Josephine found unexpectedly steadying. "You're managing admirably," he murmured during a brief moment alone. They're finding it difficult to reconcile the poised Duchess before them with the governess they expected to mock. Years of instructing unruly children prepared me well for maintaining composure in difficult situations, she replied with a small smile. His eyes warmed with something like admiration. I believe you could manage anything, Josephine Vance. The use of her maiden name in such surroundings startled her, but before she could respond, a hush fell over their section of the ballroom. Josephine turned to see a strikingly beautiful blonde woman approaching on the arm of a handsome man in an impeccably cut but slightly too fashionable evening coat. The woman's golden hair and perfect features left no doubt as to her identity, even before Quentin stiffened beside her. Lady Caroline Blackwood, he said quietly, his voice betraying no emotion. And her husband. Josephine instinctively moved closer to him, her hand finding his and squeezing gently. He glanced down at her in surprise, then tightened his fingers around hers gratefully. Caroline Blackwood paused before them, her perfect features arranged in an expression of delighted surprise. Quentin. How wonderful to see you again after so long. London has missed your presence terribly. She turned her brilliant smile toward Josephine. And this must be your Duchess. How charming. The condescension in her tone was subtle but unmistakable. Quentin's grip on Josephine's hand tightened fractionally. Caroline, you're looking well. American life clearly agrees with you. His tone was perfectly cordial, giving no hint of their history. May I present my wife, Josephine, Duchess of Thornfield. Josephine, Lady Caroline Blackwood, is an old acquaintance. Caroline's perfectly arched eyebrows rose at the deliberate diminishment of their former relationship. Merely an acquaintance, Quentin, how you wound me. She laughed lightly, then extended her hand to Josephine. I'm delighted to meet you, Duchess. Your marriage caused quite the sensation. A governess, I understand. How novel. Josephine accepted the offered hand briefly. A respectable profession requiring intelligence and discipline, qualities His Grace values highly. She smiled pleasantly. But I'm sure you're familiar with his discerning nature. Caroline's smile faltered slightly at the gentle riposte. Indeed, though I confess, I never thought Quentin would marry for anything but the most advantageous connection. His sense of duty to the dukedom always seemed paramount. Perhaps you simply misunderstood what he truly values, Josephine suggested mildly. Quentin looked down at her with something like wonder in his eyes. Then, to the astonishment of everyone within hearing distance, he laughed, a genuine, warm sound that transformed his austere features. My wife has an exceptional talent for cutting to the heart of matters, he said, his voice rich with affection that couldn't possibly be feigned. It's one of many qualities I admire in her. Caroline's perfect composure slipped momentarily, revealing surprise and something that might have been regret. Well, she recovered quickly, I'm delighted you found happiness, Quentin. We all wondered if you ever would, after everything. Life often provides exactly what we need, even when it differs from what we thought we wanted, he replied, his eyes not leaving Josephine's face. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. This was no longer merely a performance for Caroline's benefit. There was something real and unguarded in his expression that Josephine had never seen before. The moment was broken by the orchestra striking up a waltz. Quentin turned to Caroline with a polite nod. If you'll excuse us, I believe I promised this dance to my wife. Without waiting for a response, he led Josephine toward the dance floor, leaving Caroline staring after them with an expression caught between surprise and chagrin. You didn't actually promise me this dance, Josephine murmured as he took her in his arms. Didn't I? His hand settled at her waist, warm and steady, perhaps not in words. As they moved together across the polished floor, Josephine was acutely conscious of every point where their bodies connected, his hand at her waist, her palm against his shoulder, their clasped hands extended in perfect form. He was an excellent dancer, guiding her with subtle pressure and anticipating her movements as if they had waltzed together 100 times before. You defended me, he said quietly, his eyes holding hers. Against Caroline. Of course I did. She was being deliberately unkind. Most people find me difficult to defend. His voice held a note of wonder, cold, unapproachable. The Frost Duke. Most people haven't seen you with your tenants, she replied simply, or reading by firelight in the library at Thornfield, or noticing when someone might need a book of astronomical drawings. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a vulnerability rarely permitted to show. You see me differently. I see you as you are, Josephine corrected gently, not as society has labeled you or as Caroline chose to define you. He drew her infinitesimally closer, still maintaining perfect propriety for the watchful eyes around them, yet creating a sense of intimacy in the crowded ballroom. And how do you see me, Josephine? The question held genuine uncertainty, as if her answer truly mattered to him. Josephine considered carefully before responding. I see a man of deep responsibility and integrity, she said finally. Someone who protects what he values and honors his commitments, perhaps sometimes at the expense of his own happiness. A man who has built walls to prevent further hurt, yet still shows kindness when he believes no one is watching. Quentin's steps faltered momentarily, then resumed with perfect rhythm. You credit me with far more virtue than I possess. I think perhaps you credit yourself with far less, she countered. Their waltz continued in silence, both absorbed in thoughts neither was quite ready to voice. Around them, the ton observed and speculated, but their whispers no longer seemed to matter. Something fundamental had shifted between the Duke and his unexpected Duchess, something neither had anticipated when entering their arrangement of convenience. As the music drew to a close, Quentin reluctantly released her, though his hand remained at the small of her back as they moved to the edge of the dance floor. I find I've had quite enough of society for one evening, he murmured. Shall we make our excuses? Josephine nodded, relieved at the prospect of escaping the scrutiny that had followed them throughout the evening. As they made their way toward their hosts to bid farewell, Lord Harrington intercepted them, his expression troubled. A word, Thornfield, if you please, he said in a low voice. In private. Quentin frowned. Anything you wish to say can be said before my wife. Lord Harrington glanced at Josephine uncertainly, then sighed. Very well. I've just received word that James Blackwood has been arrested. Financial impropriety of the most serious kind. It seems his American railroad ventures were built on sand, or rather, on investors' money that he misappropriated. Caroline is distraught. Josephine felt Quentin stiffen beside her, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry to hear it, he said finally, though I fail to see why you're informing me. Caroline will need support during this difficult time, Lord Harrington said meaningfully. Friends who understand discretion and loyalty. Understanding dawned in Quentin's eyes. You're suggesting I offer assistance to the woman who publicly humiliated me and the man for whom she abandoned our engagement. His voice was perfectly controlled, but Josephine sensed the anger beneath. That seems remarkably presumptuous, Lord Harrington. You were once to be family, the older man pressed, and Caroline made a youthful mistake, one she has come to regret deeply. Now that circumstances have changed. Now that her husband faces ruin, you mean, Quentin interrupted coldly, and you hope my lingering affection might prompt me to rescue her from the consequences of her choice. Lord Harrington had the grace to look uncomfortable. When you put it that way. There is no other way to put it, Quentin said firmly. I wish Caroline no ill, but neither do I owe her my protection. My obligations lie elsewhere now. He placed his hand over Josephine's where it rested on his arm. My wife and I will take our leave. Good evening, Lord Harrington. As their carriage pulled away from the Harrington residence, Josephine studied her husband's profile in the dim light. His jaw was tense, his gaze fixed on the passing streetscape. Are you all right? She asked quietly. He turned to her, his expression softening. Surprisingly, yes. A year ago, even 6 months ago, such news might have affected me differently. Now it seems like a chapter from someone else's story. Because you no longer love her. Because I'm no longer certain I ever truly did. He leaned back against the carriage seat, his gaze thoughtful. What I felt for Caroline was what society expected, appropriate admiration for a suitable match. When she betrayed me, it was my pride that suffered most deeply, not my heart. Josephine considered this. Yet you closed yourself off afterward, became the Frost Duke. A defensive posture, he acknowledged. If I appeared untouchable, perhaps I would remain so. And now, do you still wish to remain untouched? The question hung between them, laden with meaning neither had dared express directly. Quentin studied her face in the alternating shadows and light as the carriage passed beneath street lamps. No, he said finally, his voice low and certain. I find that I do not. The admission, simple yet profound, shifted something fundamental between them. Josephine felt her heart quicken as he reached across the space separating them to take her hand. These past months with you have changed me, Josephine. Seeing myself through your eyes has made me question everything I believed about myself, about my capacity for genuine connection. His thumb traced slow circles on her palm, sending warmth coursing through her. When you laughed that night in the library, something frozen inside me began to thaw. Quentin, she whispered, hardly daring to believe what his words suggested. Our arrangement began as one of mutual convenience, he continued, but I find myself wishing for something more genuine between us. Something real. Josephine scarcely breathed. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've developed feelings for you that go far beyond our original agreement, feelings I thought myself incapable of experiencing. His eyes held hers, vulnerable yet determined. I'm asking if you might consider allowing our marriage of convenience to become something else entirely. Joy blossomed in Josephine's chest, sweet and unexpected. I believe it already has, she admitted softly. At least for me. The carriage arrived at Thornfield House, but neither moved to exit, too absorbed in the moment unfolding between them. Quentin raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent shivers through her entire body. May I court you properly, Josephine Xavier? He asked, a smile warming his eyes. My own wife. She laughed, the sound bright with happiness. I believe that would be most proper, Your Grace. Spring arrived at Thornfield Manor, transforming the wild moors into a canvas of vibrant colour. Heather bloomed in purple profusion, birds returned to build nests in ancient oaks, and the formal gardens burst with new life under Josephine's attentive care. Inside the manor, an equally profound transformation had taken place. Rooms long closed were opened to sunlight and fresh air, including the East Wing, which Quentin had finally decided to renovate as a memorial to his mother rather than a shrine to grief. The household staff noted with approval the changes in their master, his more frequent smiles, his willingness to entertain neighbours, his evident delight in his Duchess's company. And most remarkable of all was the change in the relationship between the Duke and Duchess themselves. What had begun as a marriage of convenience had blossomed into a deep and genuine love, built on mutual respect, shared interests, and growing understanding. On a particularly fine April morning, Josephine stood at the observation platform on the East Tower, telescope trained on a pair of nesting falcons she had been monitoring for weeks. So absorbed was she in her observations that she didn't hear Quentin's approach until his arms slipped around her waist from behind. Anything interesting today? He murmured, pressing a kiss to the sensitive spot just below her ear. Josephine smiled, leaning back against his chest. 2 chicks have hatched, the 3rd egg should follow soon. New life everywhere this spring. His embrace tightened slightly. Including, perhaps, in our own future. She turned in his arms, studying his face. What do you mean? His smile held both tenderness and barely contained excitement. Doctor. Morrison confirmed it yesterday while you were visiting the village school. We wanted to be certain before telling you. Josephine's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Her hands flew to her stomach, where the first subtle changes had only just begun to manifest. You mean? You're with child, my love, Quentin confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. Due in early November, according to the doctor. Joy overwhelmed her, bringing tears to her eyes. Oh, Quentin. Are you pleased? Pleased, he laughed, lifting her off her feet in a most undignified embrace. I am ecstatic. Terrified, overwhelmed with gratitude, he set her down gently, his hands cradling her face. You have given me more than I ever dared hope for, Josephine, a true partnership, a love I never believed possible. And now, a child. She covered his hands with her own. We've given these gifts to each other. Both of us had closed ourselves off, you behind your frost, me behind my practicality. Neither of us believed in the possibility of genuine love. And yet here we are, he murmured, leaning his forehead against hers. Forever changed. Forever changed, she agreed softly. From the moment you caught me laughing in the library. The moment my heart awoke, Quentin acknowledged, capturing her lips in a tender kiss. Above them, the spring sky stretched endlessly blue, promising new beginnings and untold possibilities for the Duke and his governess turned Duchess, whose cold engagement had blossomed, against all expectations, into the warmest and truest of loves.